Well, we're gonna wait till 2010, and that's it. We'll start right there. If you guys are running for the other fleet that's happening, please don't talk about what fleet is happening right now. But like whatever fleet is happening, if you're running for that one, you can join that one and not be in my fleet if you know the basics. Otherwise, I recommend that you join the dojo fleet under Pilinchi, and we can begin on some basic weapon mechanics and how they work. This is like gonna start from absolute scratch, right? Like 101. And if there's anyone here that does not, like, if there's anyone else, if everyone here actually understands most of the basics, we can go into some more intermediate stuff and advanced stuff. But for the time being, we'll just stick to the very basics of like the different categories of weapon systems for sub-capitals only. We'll go from there. All right, so I'm gonna need people to talk in this class with me. It's super interactive because we're not like gonna be jumping around and demonstrating too much because there's not really much to demonstrate here. It's more numbers and understanding of what's happening, right? So is there anyone here that's not been in the game for more than 6 months? 6 months, guys. Hello, team. Hi.
No.
Nobody? Okay, cool. Is there anyone here that has absolutely zero understanding of either gunnery, missile, or drone mechanics? Is there anyone here that wants to hear the difference between gunnery, missiles, and drones?
No.
Okay. So I guess we'll just do like a basic overview, and then we'll go into how, like, what weapon systems give you what advantages and what weapon systems give you which disadvantages, and what ships are usually, what race is usually bonus to what weapon system, etc., 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 right? And please tell me to slow down if you think I'm going too fast. Okay. All right. So to start off, EVE Online is basically a spaceship simulator. It's actually a submarine simulator since there's up and down and left and right? And how the weapon systems function is they take a base point of contact, which is basically your ship, and everything projects outwards from there, except for a few exceptions, such as drones and bombs. We'll get to those somewhere in the middle of the class. But for the most part, the weapon systems are categorized into gunnery-based weapon systems, missile-based weapon systems, and drones. We'll just leave bombs and smart bombs out for the time being, right? Because bomb and AoE explosion type weapon systems are a bit more complicated to understand, right? Please interrupt me if you have any questions whatsoever, okay? So as far as gunnery is concerned, we have projectile-based weapon systems, which are famous for being used by the Minmatar. We have hybrid turrets, which are famous for being used by the Calente and the Caldari. And we have lasers, which are used almost exclusively by the Amar. And now we have Triglavian weapon systems, which we will also get into at some point, right, towards the end. As far as missiles are concerned, they're relatively straightforward. They're used by mostly the Amar and the Caldari, and also by Minmatar. And the faction, the different factions that are basically a mix of the two, of two empire factions, like the high-sec factions, where Amar, Minmatar, Calente, and Caldari, and they have slightly different mechanics. So we're going to start off with like the basic gunnery mechanics, right? So when you use a weapon system which originates off of your ship, everything is relative to the distance between your ship and the enemy ship at all points of time, consistently in gunnery systems. So, for example, if your guns say that optimal range is 10 kilometers and fall off is whatever, there is a formula that dictates what the damage fall off is when you go into its fall off range. And you usually apply 100% of your damage up to your optimal range, provided you are tracking the target. And sometimes even more if your tracking is very good, right? Does anybody here not know what tracking is? Okay, everybody knows what tracking is, like every single person here. Hello, team. Hi, please speak.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Good. Okay. So when we talk about the different gunnery weapon systems, you want to understand what weapon system does the most damage in close range. These are the broad classifications, right? Like, it is commonly known that the Galente hybrid turrets, the blasters, do the most damage close range out of all the weapon systems. This is actually true. They also track arguably the best, and in some cases they don't, but in most cases they do. They shoot the damage type kinetic and thermal. Roughly, the different ammunition that is used shoots them in different ratios, but it's mostly just kinetic and thermal for hybrid systems, and they are locked into those two damage types. Those are for hybrid systems for Galente. They are moderately heavy on capacitor usage. Does everybody here understand what capacitor is and what cap means? Does everybody understand what happens when you run out of cap and you're using a cap dependent weapon system such as lasers or hybrid turrets?
Your guns turn off.
Does anybody not know this? Does anybody have any questions about this? Like, okay, right. So mostly I'm guessing at this point that everybody is at like a intermediate level of understanding as far as like weapons. Like, so we might even get into like at what point of the cycle do your guns take cap. So we'll start diving a bit deeper after I go over this basic distinction as well, right? So we're going to do hybrid systems use fire kinetic and thermal DPS. Lasers fire EM and thermal, and projectiles can do a bunch of combinations, right? So EMP will fire primarily in EM and then also fire in explosive, and I think it is thermal, kinetic. Can someone confirm this for me? It's an interactive class, guys. You guys got to do this. It is kinetic. Okay. Right? Yes, there we go. Thanks for the link. Yeah, that is EMP for projectile weapon system. Okay. So that's one basic overview of like the different damage types and what happens when you use like the different weapon systems, which are gunnery weapon systems. Also, under gunnery weapon systems, you have long-range weapon systems and short-range weapon systems. When you're using lasers, you have beam lasers that shoot far, and you have pulse lasers that shoot close. Usually, 90% of the time, right, a close-range weapon system focuses on higher damage as well as on higher tracking, right? So they track better and they shoot far, right? In certain situations, you use close-range weapon systems to kite and to play the kiting game, which is like shoot at a relatively medium range, which is out of scrambler range. And most of the time, you use the close-range weapon system to shoot within scrambler range to do close-range DPS. There are exceptions to this rule, and they're commonly seen in faction warfare PvP, and in certain cases, in certain ships like the Slicer and the Omen Navy issue. But again, we'll get into that later as far as application is concerned, right? Lasers have unlimited number of shots per ammo type selected, which are in the form of crystals, and you can switch crystals in the laser in the lasers instantly. So what happens is if your different ammo systems and different ammo types have different ranges, right? So if you're using pulse lasers, for example, has anyone here not ever used pulse lasers before? Anybody here at all that's not used pulse lasers? It's okay. I just want to know so I can explain it to you in detail.
I don't think I have.
Okay. So, all right, perfect, no problem. So you guys have flown in MOA fleets before, right? Have you guys ever flown in a MOA fleet?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you undock a MOA or a Brutix or anything that uses hybrid weapon systems such as rail guns or blasters, when you reload ammunition, or you must have heard an FC asking you to switch between thorium and antimatter and spike, right? Based on the kind of range that your fleet is sitting at compared to the other fleet, right? So different weapon systems ammunition, different ammunition dictates the different range that you shoot at, right? What happens when you have to switch or reload is that there is a reload timer right? Where there's like a bit of a delay between the changing of ammunition. There is no delay when changing crystals or ammunition for Amarr weapon systems, for Amarr lasers. They happen instantaneously, which is why they are often the versatile Kaito's dream weapon system, because like you can immediately switch between close range tracking ammo, long range ammo, mid range ammo, cap saving ammo, etc., etc., etc. We're not going to get into the different kinds of ammo right now, except for the basics. Thank you, Erasmus. Again, you are a true hero. Scorch is a pulse laser, which is a close range weapon system's close range high DPS ammo. It's a Tech 2 ammo, and it has a negative tracking bonus, which means that it does more damage, but you lose tracking, which means your guns can't turn fast enough to shoot things. So you lose out on accuracy, but you gain damage, right? Sorry, not Scorch. That's range. I think what I meant was Conflag. Can you please link Conflag as well, Erasmus? I was talking about Conflag, not Scorch. That one right there, the green one. The purple one, which is Scorch, is what that does is basically it does reduce your tracking speed, but it increases your range, but has less damage than conflagration. So what you want to do when you're flying these ships is like change ammo based on situation and shoot based on range, right? So when we get into the projectile weapon systems, I'll tell you why this is an advantage and why the Minmatar are actually at a disadvantage when compared to the Amarr in this particular case specifically, right?
Okay, you're talking about the lasers.
Yes.
You're talking about changing out ammo and everything. I've run into the problem of changing crystals out while it's grouped. Do you have to ungroup them to change the crystals?
No, you don't have to ungroup them to change the crystals. Yeah, this is something that is important to know. So the way the crystal ammunition works is that you load one crystal into the laser, and that crystal gets damaged over the number of shots fired through that crystal. So the only time you can load crystals into a group of guns is when they have taken the exact same amount of damage. So if you have one crystal that's taken less damage than the other crystal, they will not go in together. That should answer your question. And they break after they take all the damage, but don't worry, you will very rarely ever break crystals before you lose your ship if you're PvPing.
One thing too, a glitch with when you're changing lenses on your lasers, you gotta make sure for the cycle to finish. So you may preemptively, as it's decycling, change the ammo, and it may not take. It'll picture it, but then it'll switch back.
Okay.
That sometimes happens as well. But what we were talking about was the reload time. There is no reload time. There's no like 5-second reload time like there is on hybrid turrets, or 20-second reload time like there is on projectiles for certain ships, right? What happens when you... Alright, so that's basically the advantage. One of the advantages that the Amarr laser weapon system has, right? Of course, it has a disadvantage where it's like, well, not a disadvantage, but a characteristic where it's tied into EM thermal only. Now we'll focus we'll switch to the hybrid weapon systems, for example, which are which are railguns and blasters, right? Can I get a link of like a random blaster, please? We'll do those. So I linked the railgun, which is a long-range weapon system, and Erasmus has linked the blaster, which is the close-range weapon system, arguably also the highest in its class DPS system for small ships, right? So what happens? The advantage that railguns have is that they're sort of a well-balanced weapon system, because they're locked into a specific type and flavor of damage, which is your kinetic and thermal, but they have only a 5-second reload time, and they do relatively high damage and good tracking in that system, and they're not as cap hungry as the Amarr systems. So when we were talking about lasers, right, since they're lasers, they take up a lot of energy, so they take your cap. They consume capacitor faster than any other gunnery weapon system in the game, which is also why Amarr ships generally tend to have higher capacitor on their hulls than the other ships do. Right? Now, switching to, for example, I think Javelin is the... Okay, wait, we will get into the different particular kinds of ammo, right? There we go. Javelin is range penalty and tracking bonus. Yes, correct. That is for the hybrid railguns, which is a long-range weapon system of hybrid turret. And Spike is the one that gives you a tracking penalty, but a range bonus. So you might have heard on your MOA fleets, FKF or like anyone else calling for load Spike or load Javelin if they're on top of you, load Spike if they're far away, and load Thorium. Thorium is the one that gives you a cap saving bonus as well. So, different ammunition, different bonuses, different characteristics. I suggest you look into them. Also, very different damage types, damage numbers. All right. Now we'll switch to projectiles for a second, right? So we're talking about projectiles. Projectiles are very unique in the sense that in certain cases, they have very odd characteristics that make certain ships very strong in certain ways, right? So the first thing you have to remember is that when you use projectiles, you have the ability to choose your damage flavor. Now this is an advantage simply because all ships have different base resists. Does everybody know what resists are? Is there anyone here that does not know what a resist is? Basic resist of a hull. Alright, perfect. Just gonna assume that everybody knows what resists are, right? Okay, can someone tell me what the basic resist hole, as in where a ship has the least amount of resistance to a particular damage type for armor on a T1 hull? Does anybody know this?
Is it EM?
It is not EM, sir.
Can you rephrase that question, please?
Where is the basic resist hole for armor?
Explosive.
It is indeed explosive for most T1 hulls. For all T1 hulls, it is in explosive. So if you're armor tanking on a T1 ship, you're more than likely going to have a base explosive hole, which you'll have to plug with your modules and your fittings, which we won't get into right now, right? So the advantage that projectile weapon systems get is that they can choose the kind of damage that they do. They can choose whether they want to focus their damage in EM, or whether they want to focus their damage in explosive, or whether they want to focus their damage in thermal as well as kinetic in case of phased plasma. I'm going to link the different ammo types for projectiles real quick.
I got you.
Alright, you got me? Cool. I'm just going to wait for that to pop up. Phase plasma is mimicking the damage type of hybrid systems, but is more focused towards thermal than kinetic. EMP focuses on EM, and then the rest is split between explosive and kinetic. Fusion, which focuses on explosive, the best ammo to shoot against T1 armor hulls, and of course EMP against T1 shield hulls. Of course, you need to know what the standard fittings of the target ship are to actually abuse this perfectly, right? Okay, another advantage that projectile turrets have is that they're cap free. So if your ship is completely neutered out, your projectile turrets are still going to run and they're still going to do damage. Nothing stops your projectile turrets from running at all. The only thing that they are weak to are basically tracking disruptors, and that's pretty much it, or unless you're jammed or something, right? Like if you are capped out completely, it does not matter, your guns will still shoot. That is a big advantage for Minmatars. Also, unfortunately, means that Minmatar ships tend to suffer cap penalties in general. Like they don't have as much cap as an Amar ship would or a Galente ship would, usually, right? Of course, there are always exceptions. Okay, did anyone not understand these basics or have any specific questions as far as like the basic gunnery systems are concerned? Anyone at all? Nope. Okay, we're gonna go and just lightly touch on the Triglavian weapon system, which has recently been introduced into EVE Online, and we're also going to quickly run through all of these weapon systems, fall off bonuses, and what they tend to do with like their optimal ranges and fall offs and how they work, right? So just going to quickly touch Triglavian weapon systems. Triglavian weapon systems are single gunned, which means that a Triglavian ship, like usually what happens in most gunnery ships is that you put multiple guns in the high slots and then you group them together and you shoot them as one. Triglavian weapon systems don't do that. They have one single gun. The gun ramps up over a period of time, as in you shoot, it's called a spool up period. So you shoot a target and then you keep cycling the gun, and then after a period of time you hit its damage cap and you start doing ridiculously high damage. It's also the highest damage sustained gunnery system in the game right now, and it also has incredibly good tracking. So they track as well as close range weapon systems because they're a single range type weapon system that they have. So they track really well and they ramp up over a period of time, but they have no fall off. So once you're out of optimal range, or once you get TD'd, basically your damage goes down to 0, and you need to start shooting again to ramp up your DPS. That's just the basic of Triglavian weapon systems, right? Like they're called Entropic Disruptors. Now, they also have similar different kinds of ammo. You'll notice Meson, like you see Erasmus already linking stuff for you. They shoot mostly. Is it actually just explosive and thermal for everything?
Yes, that's all it is.
Yeah, it's explosive and thermal for Triglavian ships. So locked into a different, into one damage flavor as well. It's important to note. I think many people probably wouldn't know about the Triglavian ship damage types because they're so new. Okay, so I think that's it for gunnery for the time being. Is there anybody here that has any questions at all about these? I didn't talk about fall-offs. So basically, projectile weapon systems generally tend to get the best fall-off, followed by hybrid turrets, then followed by lasers, again followed by the 0 of Triglavian weapon systems, which are the Entropic Disruptors. Keep looking in Fleetfall links. Erasmus is doing an awesome job of just like helping me out with links. Any questions whatsoever? Anyone? Nope. Okay. We're going to talk about missiles now. Missiles are like very different to gunnery systems, right? In the sense that we'll also talk about how damage is shown and how you apply damage, and whether you apply all your damage or a part of your damage or a little bit of extra damage as well in like a second. And that I'll do when I hit the missile systems and when I make the comparison between why gunnery over missile and why one is like a small glass which is easy to fill up and the other one which is like a high glass with a lot of potential but harder to fill. Okay. So missiles. Easy thing about missiles, right? You don't have to worry about tracking, you just have to worry about range management and velocity. It is commonly said that web your target and apply DPS better. I mean, this is something I think most people would have heard at some point or the other. But this is not necessarily always true for all weapon systems, but it is most certainly true for missiles. Now we're getting into missiles. Again, this is a missile system that originates from your ship, a weapon system that originates from your ship and then is projected towards the enemy. How this works is you launch a missile from your ship, it flies towards your enemy, and then it hits your enemy and it explodes. Your application is based on the velocity that your enemy ship is, like the speed that your enemy ship is doing, like how fast it's going, and how big its signature is, right? The only thing that you really have to micromanage when you're flying missiles is velocity and direction, and that's it. There is no tracking, no transversal, none of that stuff really matters in practical use for an intermediate level player. You just have to worry about whether you're in range, comfortably in range, I would say, and I'll explain why. And the flavor, whether your ship is bonus to it, whether you're shooting a hole, just how fast, slow, and how big the other person's signature is, right? The most common type of missile weapon system is the light missile weapon system. Rapid lights, we see these used in Caracals, we see them used in Cerberuses, we see them used on Orthruses, we see them used sometimes on Gilas, we see them used in Legions and Lokis. Fairly common, I would say. They're just a variant of light missiles which allow them to which allow a bigger ship to fire light missiles faster. We'll just quickly go over the different kinds of missiles. So we're starting with the frigate systems. The close-range weapon system for missiles for frigates is rockets. I think Erasmus has just linked those. Yeah, rockets apply DPS quickly, and when you overheat, they usually tend to cycle faster and instead of give you like a damage bonus. And light missiles are the ones that you use for range. They fly slower and they do more alpha, but they cycle slower as well, right? There we go. The two Tech 2 weapons, the two Tech 2 ammo systems for rockets are Rage and Javelin. Rage providing high damage and less application based on signature radius, and less range as well. And Javelin, which provides more range and I think, is it slightly worse application? Or slightly better application? I'm not so sure.
It's a good question. I've never used.
I think the precision is application and javelin is pretty much range and. Yeah.
No, but you have to understand that they're for two different types of systems. Well, Rage and Javelin are for close range, and Fury and Precision are for long range. That is the mistake that most people make. Yeah.
I usually just read before applying sheet because.
Yep. I understand that. So we'll just say Javelin is for longer range right now. We'll confirm this later on as we go ahead, whether Javelin actually helps you with application or whether it doesn't, right? Say even a vet like me does not fully understand some of these. Sometimes it gets confusing. Right? When you go into the long range weapon systems, you have Fury, which does high application, and you have Precision, which does high damage but less application. Good for shooting targets that are bigger than you usually. Precision, which is good for shooting targets that are smaller than you because it does more application but less DPS, right? So for frigate-sized weapon systems, you have close-range rockets, made famous and commonly used by Suetonia's Kestrel, Breacher, etc., etc., etc. Hookbill, if you've ever seen this dude on Twitch. Please interrupt me if you have any questions. I see a lot of people entering and leaving the channel. This is like, you can interrupt and you can ask what's going on. It's totally okay. Yeah. Okay. Destroyers also use the same weapon system as frigates, and when it comes to, this is where it gets a little bit tricky and confusing sometimes, right? So when you hit cruiser-sized hulls, you start going up. There is usually what one would expect is you use heavy missiles on cruisers, which is your long-range weapon system, and heavy assault missiles, which is the equivalent of rockets. So that's the close-range damage weapon system. But there is a third, and these are called rapid weapon systems. So cruisers use rapid light missiles, which give you a clip of exactly 20 shots. Another thing that they have in common with projectile turrets, you get 20 shots and a long reload time. Rapid lights also get 20 shots and a long reload time. So what happens is you take a missile system that applies really well to small things and large things, and you put out the DPS really quickly. So your total damage output is calculated based on your clip size. So the total damage that you do with all 20 missiles is what you can do in that one clip, and then you have like a long reload, right? So that's how that is calculated. So 3 weapon system types for cruisers, which is your standard cruiser heavy missile long range weapon system, heavy assault missile close range weapon system, and your rapid weapon system, which is your rapid light missiles, which are the most commonly used on caracals. I'm sure everyone here has at least seen a caracal fleet before, if not flown in one, right? Yeah. DPS comes, of course, with the cruiser-sized weapon systems, but that's okay. We're just looking at right now the basics of what these things are. Another advantage that most people forget is that most people are not aware of, and a disadvantage as well in certain cases, is the fact that missile weapon systems can usually load and fire any flavor of missile, and that missile flies only that particular flavor. There's no hybridized missile flavors. So if you fire Mjolnir, which is this one right here, of anything Mjolnir, you'll be firing only EM damage. So that is an advantage. So you can pick your hole and shoot there, right? But Kaldari ships are famous for being locked into kinetic flavor. So they get an additional bonus to kinetic, and they get half the applied bonus to all missile systems. right? Yeah, for example, the Condor in frigates, the Cerberus for cruisers, the Flycatcher for your destroyers and inties, things like that. Okay, so that is the cruiser type weapon system. Now we'll go into the battleship or the large weapon systems. The large weapon systems are basically torpedoes and cruise missiles, right? And the rapid weapon system is the rapid heavy missile weapon system, which is commonly seen in, I don't know if any of you guys used to follow the Alliance tournament, but on battleships which rely on jams, and they sync very well with jams. So rapid weapon systems sync very well with jams, because what happens is it takes you roughly around like 20 to 25 seconds with heat, etc., like to unload everything onto a player, and it syncs very well because when you jam things, you apply DPS quickly and then you have a long reload, so your overall DPS flatlines, but you have a spike in DPS with rapid systems. This is something that's important to remember. It's not consistent. It's a spike and then a slump, and then it all flatlines and averages out to give you your paper DPS. Okay, did I miss anything subcap wise? We did tops. Tops are basically the close range, and cruise missiles are the long range, the ultra long range sniper battleship weapons. They don't apply very well to anything but battleships, unfortunately. Made very famous recently by the use of micro jump drive ravens. Not gonna get into that, but you know, you can look them up and those mechanics will be explained to you guys. All right, does anybody have any questions as far as missiles are concerned? There are no wrong questions. You can ask me anything you want. Nobody? Okay. Alright, switching into drone weapon systems, right? So drones are unique in the sense that they can be destroyed. The DPS does not originate from your ship, it originates from the drone. The way drone DPS works is that it is a gun and it tracks based on the drone's location, and they have tracking values. So intermediate level, not going to dive further into it. There is more to do, there is more to know, but not anything apart from like just the basic flavors of damage right now. So acolytes do EM damage. They are the Amar variant of the drone. They have decent tracking, decent speed, medium. Warriors are the Minmatar version. They have decent tracking, uber speed, very fast, catch things super fast. Hobgoblins are the Galente version. They do, and this is only for light drones, by the way. Hobgoblins are the Galente version. They do thermal damage, and they're the hardest hitting but slowest flight of drones. Hornets do kinetic damage, obviously the Kaldari version. Sort of slow-ish, but decent enough tracking, not too crazy. Something to remember, the most commonly used drones for light drones are warriors and acolytes, simply because warriors can go fast enough to catch interceptors and are very good at pushing off light tackle. Acolytes, very good light DPS system, and it shoots into EM, so it's very good and very commonly used in T1 fleets against T1 shield ships, so they're pretty decent as well. They have very good tracking. Like, they track well and are usually used for their flavor of damage more than anything else, especially in areas like faction warfare. The bigger versions of these for acolytes are the Infiltrator. Am I right? Is it Infiltrator? It is Infiltrator Praetor. Yeah, there we go. Erasmus is linking them. So there's acolytes, infiltrators, and then the heavy drone praetors, and curators for sentry drones. Sentry drones we will get into right at the end of this as well. So drones are usually mobile. They chase your target. Once you launch your drones, based on the drone control range that your ship has, the drones will actually chase down a target and then shoot at it, right? So for example, if I was sitting in a Vexor Navy issue, which is a drone ship, and I had a drone control range of 60 kilometers, if my target is within 60 kilometers from me, I can tell my drones to attack that target, and the drones will follow that target and shoot it. There are exceptions to this, but none you need to know for intermediate levels, right? So that's what drone control range is, and normal drones will move around and follow your target and shoot them. So they are kiteable, so it's like kiting a close range weapon system ship that has no tackle is basically kiting drones. So if you're flying around in a circle in an interceptor tackling me and I launch infiltrators to shoot you, my infiltrators will more than likely never be able to even reach you. They will just get stuck just trying to follow you because you're too fast for them if you're in an interceptor, right? So that's like the basics. So you have acolytes, infiltrators, freighters. Can drones hit a target inside drone control range but outside targeting range? Yes, they can. There is this mechanic called assisting of drones. There used to be a mechanic called the assigning of drones. They're two different things. Right now we'll only focus on the assisting. What happens sometimes is that if I have a drone control range of 120 and my friend in my fleet has a targeting range of 120, I can assist my drones to him. He can lock the target that he wants to shoot the target, and my drones will automatically chase that target. I think the mechanics of drones also warrants an in-depth class in itself, but like it takes way too long to get into all the mechanics and how to misuse them and abuse them and what happens when drones get jammed, etc., etc., etc. It's a whole complicated mess. So we won't touch that. We're just going very basic right now. Basic enough, right? And then as you have warriors, hobgoblins, and that's different. Warriors, valkyries, and berserkers for Minmatar. Have hobgoblins, hammerheads, and ogres, if I'm not mistaken, for Galente. And you have the Kaldari ones as well, which I will just look up really quick. Bad, I don't have this.
Wasps, and Vespas.
Hornets, Vespas, and Wasps.
Wasp.
Yeah. Alright, so those are the drones as far as mobile drones are concerned. Right? Just remember, all drones have tracking and are based on gunnery systems, but the DPS from the drones originates from the drone itself. So the drone has to be in range and has to be tracking the target for it to apply tracking, for it to apply its DPS. We have Sentry Drones. The old potato meta of EVE Online, Ishtar fleets. I don't know how many of you vets are around, but it used to be this crazy thing where people would go fly into like the battle zone with a whole bunch of Ishtars, drop drones, assist them all to the FC, and the FC just locks up a target, presses F, and it just blows up because of all the drone alpha. That's no longer too much of a thing because Ishtars have been nerfed. However,
still get it with Gearless though, don't you?
You do, but it's not the same thing. There's no alpha because there is drone travel time. Sentries, it's almost instantly applying DPS.
Yeah.
How sentries work are you drop a drone, they sit in one place, they don't move, right? And they usually have long ranges, far greater ranges than traditional drones, further amplified by certain ship bonuses like Ishtars and omnidirectional tracking links to further the damage of these drones. We're going to get into DPS modules for your ship for the different weapon systems as well, just like basic brief overview and the support systems. So again, your curators, if I'm not mistaken, it is curators that have max range on sentries, right? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong.
Wardens are max range.
Wardens, are wardens the Galente ones?
Kaldari.
Okay. You have wardens, then Galente, then Amar, and then Valkyrie. No, it should be the other way around. It should be wardens, then curators, then Minmatar ones, which are, what are the Minmatar? Bouncers, and then you have the ones for Galente. I don't even know what they're called anymore. Holy shit, hold on.
Guards, yeah, there we go, guards. Alright. Just gonna toss these out in links. There we go. Someone's already run Erasmus, of course, saving the day. Yes, Galente is indeed the shortest range. Yep. Okay, so that covers all these three weapon systems to like basic knowledge. You can always dive in deeper and read the stats and figure out what does what, etc.
there anything anyone needs to know? Are you guys all familiar with how to amplify weapon systems and get the most out of them? For example, how to use the appropriate number of damage lows and how to actually, we'll just get into it really quickly, right? So we'll start with gunnery all over again, right? If you're using hybrid turrets, you're going to want to be using magnetic field stabilizers to get DPS out of your hybrid turrets. So magnetic field stabilizers will increase your fire rate as well as your damage, unless I'm mistaken. I'm not, because it's both, right? Perfect. If you are using projectile turrets, you're going to want to be using gyro stabilizers, although there is a situation where you would prefer a damage rig over a gyro stabilizer, and that is because of the highest alpha weapon system, which is the artillery weapon system, right? In case you guys are not aware of this, alpha is basically what happens, the amount of damage that is applied through one cycle of your weapon system, right? So if you compare, for example, can someone quickly link me artillery, and I'll just do it real quick. Right, there's two weapon systems that link: the 720mm prototype siege cannon and the 250mm railgun 2. The 720 is basically a medium artillery weapon system. The advantage that the artillery weapon system has, again, I've told you guys, no cap usage, right? And the second advantage that it has is it has the highest single instance damage that you can do in a weapon system, right? So artillery will give you 20 shots before you have a wrong reload, but the actual damage that's done from the volley, from the first shot of the artillery cannon, like each time the gun cycles and actually shoots you, is way higher than the railgun. Whereas the railgun will cycle like every 4 or 5 seconds, the artillery will take far longer, but it'll do a higher amount of damage. So what you can do is you can actually one-shot a ship with artillery cannons if you have enough of your own artillery ships. And these fleets that run alpha, that rely on killing enemy ships in one shot, are called alpha fleets. So that is one of the things that, like, that is one way of abusing, or like not abusing, just like taking advantage of a characteristic of projectile turrets and artillery. I think Erasmus just linked a wind run artillery tornado that does super high damage in one shot and then is designed to leave before it gets killed, if I'm not mistaken. Warp and shoot, leave, that sort of thing.
Yep.
Yeah, there you go. You use gyro stabilizers for projectile weapon systems, but you use collision aerators if you want to only increase its damage and not its rate of fire. Again, alpha doctrines and alpha fleets rely on instantaneous application of damage and not applied DPS consistently, right? Which is why, but they also only get 20 shots before they have to reload, right? So this is important to note, which is why when you have critical mass, a nightmare fleet will always beat a Machariel fleet as long as nightmares are consistently alphaing Machariels. Because Machariels will kill 20 nightmares and then they have to sit and reload, whereas nightmares will just consistently keep killing max as long as they can alpha them. If you guys are not familiar with nightmares and Machariels, just ignore that statement completely, because that's a little bit more advanced, but that's fine. There we go. We went to... You use heat sinks for lasers, because that's just what you use. Also keep in mind, guys, that every time there's this thing called stacking penalties, which basically means that if your heatsink applies a 20% overall bonus to your DPS, if you use more than one, it applies less than 20%. So it goes 20% and then it drops off to, like, I think, what is it, 18% or 17.5%, and then 15%, and then 10%, and so on and so forth. Well, don't take those numbers with a pinch of salt, please. But it is almost never worth it to use more than 4 damage amplifying low slots for a weapon system for PvE usage, and for PvP usage you generally don't ever want to use more than 3. That's just a basic thumb rule. Obviously, there are exceptions for everything, but you just have to look into those. You use ballistic control systems for missile damage, and you use entropic radiation heat sink or something for the triglavian weapon systems. Again, basically the same stuff. 3 is where you want to be. There are, of course, exceptions and special low slot modules, such as certain ballistic control systems. I will just link you one really quick. CX Histava or something it's called. Control. The 2 ballistic control systems there are different because well, which is this one? What is this? Polyphobos? I haven't seen this one. That's an application bonus one as well. Okay. I linked the wrong one. Right, okay, there we go. So the one I linked first, which is the C3 TAC-X Haiwa Satsuo ballistic control system, also gives you a bonus to damage in missiles, and a bonus to DPS in missiles, and it gives you a bonus to DPS in drones. It splits it evenly. So for certain ships that have their DPS split between drones and missiles, such as certain types of legions, certain types of like Gilas and rattlesnakes, that is sometimes niche and ideal. Again, follow the same rule with stacking penalties, and you should be fine in most situations. Of course, exceptions to everything. The MLEKP Polypolos ballistic control system gives you an application bonus, which is actually very useful for certain ships. It makes certain ships more viable, certain ham ships, certain heavy missile ships. You actually do not need as much DPS as application instead. Well, that basically covers missile systems. And use drone damage amplifiers for your drones, for use commonly in the VNI Haven/Forsaken Hub Rattle, and like 2 to 3 just for general DPS ships. You use drone link augmenters to get extra drone control range. If someone would link that, that would be really nice. You use omnidirectional tracking links to get them to track better, and you use drone navigational computers to get them to move faster. That basically covers the basics of the different weapon systems. Now we have exactly 13 minutes left on this 1-hour lecture, so I'm going to quickly just dive into the resist holes for basic ships. Just going to get a glass of water really quick. This is going to take me about 60 seconds. And then we'll dive into holes and resist. Please prepare your questions if you have any, and I will answer them to the best of my ability. We'll be right back in about 60 seconds. Thanks. All right, cool, I'm back. Any questions, anyone? No questions? Okay. We're gonna get into resist, and this is kind of tricky, okay? Because this is something that an FC or a PvPer should always be checking. This is not something that you you half-ass. This is important, and there are certain basic rules that you follow for T1 ships, and there are certain racial resists and Tech 2 resists and Tech 3 resists, as well as faction resist bonused ships, right? So we're going to just start with like the basic T1 resist profile for most ships and the basic thumb rules, right? Because this is just an intermediate class. We don't want to get into too many specifics, right? We're going to go with basic thumb rules, right? When you are fighting an armor doctrine, right, you're going to want to understand that its basic resist is in explosive, right? But you also want to understand that if it is not a DPS focused doctrine and more a tank focused doctrine, this happens when you get a little bit more experience in the game, that they will have covered the explosive hole in their resists, and it will no longer be the weakest link in its armor. This is something everyone in this class needs to understand. Everyone that says, oh, it's armor, so shoot explosive, needs to understand, right? A lot of times they will cover up their holes. Same goes with EM T1 shield ships. The basic hole is in EM. So if you're fighting an Orthrus, you should shoot EM at it 100% because it needs tackle modules, it needs speed, it needs block range shit, it needs a bunch of different stuff, right? So it may not have the fitting to cover the EM hole. So you can shoot EM at an Orthrus and you'll probably do okay. You shoot EM at a fleet caracal and you probably won't do okay because it won't be the most covered hole in the ship hull, right? That's something to understand. This is kind of tricky, so I expect questions now, at least if you guys are paying attention. So does anybody have questions?
It's not.
Nope.
It's not exactly a question, but
Shoot.
what I seem to see is that usually those types of fleets, for example, Shield, they tend to cover the EM. Then you have more to the kinetic or thermal, and the same goes to armor. Usually, thermal is the weakest link when they try to cover their holes.
Yeah, that is actually true. The caracal, full tank fit caracal, has a thermal hole, at least in its shield, which is the only thing that's important in fleets, right? Because it's catching reps in shield. So that is what you understand. So if you're fighting a caracal that has no tackle, that's part of a fleet, you want to be shooting thermal at it, right? That does well, right? You know, that's important. Now, when you move on to Tech 2 resists, Tech 2 resists are different for the different races. They just are. So for example, if you look at the Tech 2 resist hull of a Cerberus, for example. Someone link a Cerb in fleet chat so we can all just open it up and look at the shield EHP.
Set.
You're going to look at the shield resist is again empty when it comes to EM, right? It has no EM resistances. That is Kaldari, no EM resistances, strong thermal resist, and relatively strong kinetic resistance shield, right? Now, if you immediately switch and link a Munin, can someone link a Munin for me, please? You will notice that it's complete. It is, while it's a shield tank ship, right? Its shield resist, it has 75% shield EM resistance, and it has its lowest resistance kinetic and its second lowest resist in explosive, and immediately after that it is thermal, right? So what do you assume here when you're fighting a Munin, and what do you assume when you're fighting a Cerb? They're two very different base resist profiles. So based on the kind of fitting that they have, you need to find out where the resist hole is and shoot into that. Oftentimes you don't really have a choice. So like if you're shooting, like if you're flying Brutix Navy issues, which is like the bold favorite at the current minute, right? You're shooting, you're going to be shooting hybrid turrets, which means you're shooting thermal and kinetic, which means you don't have a choice, but you do have a choice in your drones, right? So that's good for putting like pressure to make people like broadcast for reps or things like that. So you want to run EM generally. At least we like to run EM sometimes. Sometimes we'll switch it up and we'll ride explosive, but we'll never do anything which is the same DPS as our hybrid turrets, for example, right? Can you also link me Sacrilege, please? Whether the commonly accepted flavor to shoot at for Munins is usually hybrid turret DPS, which is like thermal and kinetic, because the explosive is usually covered somewhere or the other. Now, the Sacrilege, first thing you have to understand is whatever you're looking at in shield is completely irrelevant because it is not a shield tank ship, it is an armor tank ship, right? Now, one would expect that an armor tank ship would have a humongous hole, an absolutely humongous hole in explosive, but it has 80% resistance in explosive. So what you want to shoot here, commonly accepted, is you're going to shoot EM. And the reason you shoot EM against Axe or or Amar ships that are T2 tanked in armor is usually because they will cover everything else except the third weakest resist, which is in this particular case EM. You can expect in this particular case it's kinetic, but you shoot in EM because usually they leave the EM hole open. I'm sorry, I don't know where the third came from. There was a T3 resist thing. Never mind, ignore. They will cover their thermal hole, right? So the only thing to understand here is that every ship that is Tech 2 is different. The norms usually only apply to Tech 1 ships. You want to check common fittings and common fleet compositions to understand what you're shooting at a certain ship and like how it's flying, how it's like what it's doing, etc., 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 right? Heat versus Amar T2, yeah, that's what I meant, right? Not the third resist, that's a different thing altogether. Can someone link me a sweep pool, please? A sweep pool. Actually, did we cover Galente T2 resist? No, we didn't. Okay, so we'll get to the sweep pool later. Can someone link me a Demos? Someone other than Erasmus link me a Demos so I know you guys are actually here.
That's Joy Fleet then.
I don't think everybody's in the fleet.
Alright, it's fine. When you look at a Demos, right, again, it's an armor tank ship, and you look at its kinetic resistance, it's absolutely ridiculous, right? So this is the only one that actually follows the norm and has a hole in explosive, but 90% of the time, the explosive hole is well covered. It is well covered for Galente T2 ships, right, whenever they are used. So you kind of want to be shooting, I would say, thermal or EM, but EM is usually covered as well. I remember back in the day when AHACs were common, Proteus used to actually have an EM hole, so everyone would be shooting EM into the Proteuses. Gimmick tanking is always a thing, of course, when you know that people are actually locked into a particular DPS. So if you're fighting a Harpy fleet and you know nobody else is around, very viable to just go and resist up in EM, in kinetic thermal, and just like sit on top of them while they do no DPS to you. Right? Totally normal. Now we're going to get into T3 resist. Now this is where it starts getting hairy, right? We're going to start with the destroyers. So we're going to go for the Swipple. You look at the Swipple, and this resist profile is very interesting to look at. It is 50, 40, 40, 50, which is where the myth that you should always be shooting phase plasma into T2 min meta comes from, right? Into T3/T2 min meta comes from. This is a T3 resist profile. T3 resist profiles are completely different from T2 resist profiles. Not completely, but like they're different, right? So you want to understand that there is no EM hole for shield tank ships for min meta as long as they are T2 and above. Basics. You shoot phase plasma, you're usually doing okay. Against T2, you can start shooting explosive, but it's probably going to be covered. Something to understand. Can someone link me? Well, just tell you right off the bat that the Jackdaw does have an EM hole, which is hard-ish to cover. So you could shoot EM and you do relatively well, especially if you newt it out. Could someone link me? What is the other one that's really common? The Confessor. Someone link me a Confessor, please. Yep, surprise, surprise. Again, this one is in fact in thermal for the Confessor. And can we have a... Finally, can we have a Hecate? Everybody does understand that we're talking about the DPS hole, right? The resist hole, the one weak part of its armor, the one weak part of the ship's shield. That's where you want to try to shoot, as long as it's not covered by a module. This is too broad a subject to actually pinpoint and say, okay, this ship you shoot that. It's all based on the way the enemy actually fits their ship. I think it's a good thing to understand that T2 resists are different and T3 resists are different as well. They usually have more resistance than T1. It's another thing. It's important. Hecate, again, standard, pretty much explosive hole. And I guess the rest is basically up to you guys to Python and look at and figure out for yourselves. Python is a great tool. I expect most veterans to have it. Actually, all veterans to have it, unless they're stuck in some 2012 version of EFT or something. And with that basically concludes the intermediate class for weapon systems and damage types and like resistances. Does anybody have any questions? Do you think I've missed out on anything? Team, hi.
Torpedoes, but I think that applies to missiles, so...
Yep, well, we did torps. We went through torps. Torps and cruise.
Okay. Never mind then.
Yep. I think that should be pretty much it. Okay, guys. That concludes today's class on the basics of different weapon systems and resistances. I am a little bit tired now after that 1 hour. Thank you for coming. I hope this was useful.
Thanks, FC.
Thank you.